Hello and welcome. You're watching News Central Television. I am Judith TV. Here are the stories making headlines beyond the continent. And we begin in the Middle East, where Ahmed al-Sharaa, Syria's new leader, has urged the international community to remove the economic sanctions imposed on the country due to the former regime's criminal conduct, which resulted in the deaths of its own citizens. During a joint press conference with visiting Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, al-Sharaa also stated that all weapons would fall under state control and that armed factions will begin to announce their dissolution and enter the army following future discussions with military and defense officials on a new military structure.
وأيضا على المجتمع الدولي أن يدفع باتجاه رفع العقوبات الاقتصادية التي لحقت بسوريا جراء تصرفات النظام المجرم الذي النظام السابق الذي قام بتصرفات معينة كما رأيتم من قتله لشعبه، فنتج منه العقوبات الاقتصادية التي قامت عليه. نحن قمنا بعمل عسكري كبير ودخلنا إلى حواضر كبرى، والناس على العكس لاقتنا بترحاب كبير من جميع مكونات الشعب السوري. ونحن الآن نعمل على حماية الطوائف والأقليات أيضا من أن يحصل هناك اعتداء بيني فيما بينهم أو أن يستغل هذا المشهد أحد من الأدوات الخارجية لإثارة النعرات الطائفية. سوريا بلد للجميع ونحن نستطيع أن نتعايش مع بعضنا، ونحن على علاقة وثيقة مع كل مكونات الشعب السوري، وهناك توافق كبير من جميع المكونات على إزالة هذا النظام والقيام بتأسيس لدولة جديدة إن شاء الله تليق بوضع المجتمع السوري وحال المجتمع السوري إقليميا ودوليا إن شاء الله.
Meanwhile, Qatar's Minister of State at the Foreign Ministry, Mohammed Al-Khalifa, has arrived in Damascus for talks with Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa. The visit marks the first high-level Qatari delegation to Syria in 13 years following a prolonged diplomatic rupture. Al-Khalifa landed at the Damascus airport, signaling a significant shift in relations between the two nations. The Qatari Foreign Ministry has confirmed the historic nature of the visit, which comes amid Syria's changing political landscape after the ousting of former President Bashar al-Assad. The visit is expected to focus on fostering diplomatic ties and addressing key regional issues such as Qatar and Syria navigate a new chapter in their relationship. Still on diplomacy, Iran has affirmed its support for Syria's sovereignty and warned against the country becoming a haven for terrorism following the fall of President Bashar al-Assad, a longtime ally. Speaking at a press briefing on Monday, the Foreign Ministry spokesperson reiterated Iran's stance on preserving Syria's territorial integrity and allowing its people to determine their future without foreign interference. The spokesperson noted Iran has had no direct contact with Syria's new rulers since Assad fled earlier this month after a swift rebel offensive. The takeover, led by the Sunni Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, has raised concerns regionally and internationally. Meanwhile, Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, has met with foreign officials, including U.S., Turkish, and Jordanian diplomats, signaling shifting alliances in the region.
حاکمیت و یکپارچگی سوریه و تصمیم گیری در مورد آینده سوریه توسط سوری‌ها بدون مداخله مخرب خارجی، این یک اصلی است که فکر می‌کنم در سطح منطقه و در سطح بین‌المللی در موردش اجماع است.
Joining us now to discuss this in details is world affairs commentator Laurie Large. She joins me from London. Laurie, it's always wonderful to have you join us. Let's get started.
Good evening, Judith. Nice to see you.
Yeah, let's just set the tone, shall we? How does, Iran's emphasis on, Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity align with his historical support for President Assad and his broader regional strategy?
Well, Iran is really playing a very interesting game here because, yes, Iran has reaffirmed its support, or reaffirmed, perhaps too strong a word, affirmed its support for Syria's territorial integrity. But just yesterday, the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, had actually stood up and said that Syria's youth will most likely resist this new government, that young Syrians have absolutely nothing to lose. So playing things a little bit on both sides here from Iran. But I think the thing that's very interesting right now is that Syria, for the first time in 2 decades, if not more, actually has a little bit of leverage with its erstwhile allies, Iran and Russia. Syria was such an important entrepot for Iranian goods and currency or funds going in and out of the country. Remember, Iran is under heavy-duty sanctions by all of the Western countries, and it has to finance itself by selling oil largely illegally. Some of the oil sales are legal. Some go to countries that have not imposed sanctions on Iran. But there's a lot of, kind of dodgy dealing going on, and much of that was going through Syria. So oil and arms were getting out of Iran, some of those arms going to Russia, some of that oil going to all sorts of places, including China. And on the other hand, cash was going into Iran through illicit trails in Syria. So Iran would very much like to preserve its status, or Syria's status, as a place to do business, whether over the table, under the table, or over the table. And digressing a tiny bit, Russia also needs something from Syria, and that's to retain those bases it has on the Mediterranean. There's an Air Force base and a naval base that Russia has in the Antakya region. That's where the al-Assads hail from. That's where their Alawite minority sect lives. And Russia would very much like to keep those bases because that is Russia's really only access to the Mediterranean. So Syria, all of a sudden, finds itself with a little bit of leverage.
And then what then would now be the potential consequences for regional stability if Syria becomes a haven for terrorism, as Iran warns, under the new leadership of Ahmed al-Sharaa?
Certainly, Iran is saying that, and this is something that America has been warning of as well, perhaps not quite as loudly as Iran has been doing. But, it's very interesting because in the days after the Assad family departed from Syria, you didn't hear many official Americans who are in office right now saying, my word, this is a huge step for the Syrian people. The Syrian people have lived under a dictatorship for more than half a century. What you heard from Americans who were in office was, we don't want to see a power vacuum. We don't want to see ISIS reconstitute itself in some of the areas where there are training camps. And remember, this new regime, or the dominant factor in the new regime, the HTS, was an offshoot of ISIS, was very closely aligned with ISIS until 2016. So that's what American officials have been saying, and they do not want to see a further shattering of the country. Now, some American officials privately have said this is this can only be good news, or hopefully only be good news for the Syrian people. But it's interesting that what America is saying and what Iran is saying align a little bit here, that they do not want to see a power vacuum. Now, add in one other regional power, and that's Turkey. Turkey is at odds with America here. In fact, Turkey is supporting one rebel faction. America is supporting another. And despite the fact that America and Turkey are NATO allies, the Turkish rebels that America is supporting have been completely, they're not liked at all by the Turkish government. So there's all sorts of jockeying going on here, and no real clarity about whether this new government or this interim government is going to be able to pull all these factions together into a coherent state.
Now, let's juxtapose Iran's stance, right, and that of the other countries who Syria's leadership is now, having engagements with, and that's the U.S., Turkey, as well as Jordan as well. We've seen, the new leadership sort of have engagement with the diplomats from these 3 countries. Do you see this having a shift in the overall Middle East as well as Syria as well? Will it impact Iran's influence in Syria and the Middle East?
I mean, one of the biggest shifts that I think is worth noting, it's been going on for a couple of days, but it's such a massive deal, it's worth repeating, and that's that both the EU and America are actually talking to Mr. al-Shara, the head of the H2TS. Remember, he is deemed a terrorist by the United States, by the European Union. There, until recently, was a $10 million bounty on his head. That has been suspended. But under American law, America is not meant to be talking to people it's deemed terrorists. And certainly, while this rebel group was gaining some steam and making its march on Aleppo and then down to Damascus, there was discreet discussion going on through third parties and that sort of thing. But America is now talking to this government, and I think, or this leading faction in what we hope will develop to becoming a government. And we can only hope that this sort of discussion continues. Syria is going to need the help of outsiders, both diplomatically, economically, financially, and I think the key is to make sure that these outsiders are able to act in Syria's best interests rather than their own more narrow interests.
And just talk about, would there be any broader implications of Iran's lack of direct contact with Syria's new rulers on its ability to maintain a foothold in the region? Would there be any implications at all?
Well, I think certainly if Iran is no longer able to use Syria as a transit point for, as we opened our conversation, for goods, for funds going in and out of the country, that will have some severe repercussions for Iran's economy. And Iran's economy is a mess. It is suffering under the weight of those sanctions that are imposed by the U.S., by the European Union. Now, the new Iranian president has said that he is open to discussions that may relieve those sanctions. Now, you'll remember that it was Donald Trump, when he was president the first time around, who paid to what was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and that relieved some of those sanctions that have now been reimposed on Iran and allowed Iran to gain some money in the international markets from selling its oil. So we have a very big question mark on whether America would be willing to speak to Iran. But there's another question mark as well, and that's the longevity of the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, in Iran. He's 85 years old. Lots of reports, nothing confirmed, that his health is really suffering. Not clear how long he will be around. It's not clear he will replace him. The leading candidate seems to be his second son, who would be regarded as another hardliner. But that looks, that role, which is so important in Iranian politics, could be coming open at some point. So we have a much more reformist president who will fill that role of supreme leader. That's an open question. So Iran's place is very precarious now. And as I said, under against the backdrop of a really, really weak economy. So where Iran goes from here is an interesting question.
And we wait to see in the coming weeks and maybe into the new year, with the swearing-in ceremony just around the corner. We wait to see what will be the fate of these two countries. But we must say thank you, Laurie, for doing justice as always. Thank you so much for coming on.
Always a pleasure, Judith.
Laurie, the world affairs commentator, just giving us an expert analysis on Iran's reiterating its support for Syria's sovereignty. And off to Asia we go, as Bangladesh has asked India to facilitate the return of oust Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to Dhaka. The 77-year-old Hasina fled to India on August 7th following a popular uprising against alleged atrocities and oppression during her 15-year rule. More than 700 people, mostly youth, were killed during the student-led uprising, which led to the formation of a transitional government. Back home in Dhaka, Hasina is facing many allegations, including alleged genocide and crimes against humanity. But bilateral relations between the two South Asian neighbors have been on the decline, with Dhaka accusing Indian media of running propaganda against Bangladesh. And off to China, as China has warned that Philippines risks triggering an arms race after Manila announced plans to acquire U.S. Typhoon missile system. The Philippines views the missile system as crucial for protecting its maritime interests, particularly in the disputed South China Sea. Now, China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Mao Ting, has called the move provocative and dangerous, warning that it could escalate regional tensions. Mao added that the acquisition could spark a broader arms race and deepen geopolitical confrontations. The Typhoon missile system, known for its advanced strike capabilities, represents a significant military upgrade for the Philippines amid growing territorial disputes with China. Now, this development has raised concerns across Southeast Asia, the U.S., and China. Welcome back. The news continues in Europe, where we understand that an oil spill on the Black Sea coast has contaminated kilometers of beaches in Russia and Crimea, including the central embankment of Kerch in Crimea. Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations staff and volunteers have been cleaning thousands of tons of oil resulting from the spill. The disaster was caused by an aging Russian oil tanker that broke apart and sunk, while another ran aground in the strait connecting the Azov and Black Seas. The strait, located between Moscow-annexed Crimea and Russia's Krasnodar region, is a popular area known for its beach resorts. Efforts to contain the pollution are ongoing, with authorities working to mitigate the environmental damage caused by the spill.
Президент поставил задачу сделать так, чтобы купировать нефтепродукты и источник загрязнения в море.
Now, tributes have been paid to a 9-year-old boy who was killed in an attack on a German Christmas market. Andrei Glasner died after a car drove into a crowd of shoppers at the market in Magdeburg on Friday evening. A social media post reportedly attributed to Adrian's mother called him "my little teddy bear" and said he would always live in our hearts. 4 women also killed in the attack as the far right tries to now exploit the attack. Questions are being asked how this could have happened again in Germany. For News Central, international correspondent Afia Hagen has more.
For weeks, German officials had fretted about the risk of a terrorist attack on the country's Christmas markets. Crowded, difficult to secure gatherings with religious connotations that could make them attractive targets for jihadists. In 2016, a Tunisian migrant aligned with Islamic State drove a lorry into a Christmas market in West Berlin, killing 13 people in one of modern Germany's deadliest terrorist incidents. The horror they feared arrived on the evening of December 20th, when a BMW ploughed through the Christmas market in Magdeburg, killing a child and 4 women and leaving hundreds injured. The suspected perpetrator is Talib al-Abdulmohsen, a 50-year-old Saudi psychiatrist who arrived in Germany in 2006 and was granted asylum 10 years later. So far, the case leaves more questions than answers. One is whether Germany's authorities were asleep at the wheel. Mr. al-Abdulmohsen appears to have a long history of erratic behaviour and run-ins with the police. Over the past year and on social media and in private messages, he became obsessed with the idea that German authorities were persecuting refugees who have renounced Islam. The political fallout has already begun. Germany is gearing up for a snap election in late February after its 3-party coalition fell apart in November. Although the early sparring has focused on Germany's stagnant economy, nerves over immigration and security were already on edge after several fatal jihadist attacks earlier this year, including one by a Syrian asylum seeker who had evaded deportation. On December 21st, around 2,000 far-right activists and neo-Nazis convened in Magdeburg, calling for the... On December 21st, around 2,000 far-right activists and neo-Nazis convened in Magdeburg, calling for the liberation of the German people and urging the remigration of foreigners. Questions are also being asked over the role of social media in spreading disinformation. Even once it became clear that Mr. al-Abdulmohsen didn't fit the archetype of an Islamic extremist, conspiracy theories continue to swirl in Germany and beyond. The people of Magdeburg are grief-stricken and exhausted, and they just want to understand why the Christmas market was attacked. If they wait too long for answers, their fear may turn to anger, and the closer Germany gets to the general election, the greater the risk that parties will try to seek support by exploiting those divisions. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagen.
And thanks to Afia Hagen for that report. We now head to the U.S., where we tell you that the suspect accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson has pleaded not guilty to New York State murder and terrorism charges. 26-year-old Luigi Bangioni appeared in court on Monday to be arraigned on 11 state criminal courts, including criminal counts, including murder, a crime of terrorism as well. He also faces federal stalking and murder charges that could lead to a death penalty sentence. Now, prosecutors allege that Mangione shot Thompson in central Manhattan before going on the run. Authorities later arrested him at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, a man has been arrested in New York in connection with the death of a woman who was set on fire on a subway train in Brooklyn. Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch described the incident on Sunday as one of the most depraved crimes one could possibly commit against another human being. According to Tisch, the woman was on a stationary F train to Brooklyn when she was approached by a man who used a lighter to ignite her clothing. The victim died at the scene, adding that the suspect had been arrested following a tip-off from a group of high school students as he rode the subway later on Sunday. And now off to North America, where we tell you that at least 7 people have died from a light aircraft crashed on Sunday in a heavily forested area of Jalisco in western Mexico, according to authorities from according to report from local authorities. Now, the aircraft, a Cessna 207, was flying from La Parata to the neighboring state of Michoacán. Jalisco's civil protection said via its social media that the crash site was in an area that was difficult to access. According to the service, the first responders on the site reported a preliminary count of 7 people dead who have not yet been identified. And that's all on Beyond the Continent. It's back to the continent, West Africa. Now remember that you can watch us anywhere, even if you're beyond the continent, on our social media platforms. We're also on DSTV channel 422. Find us on Star Times channel 274. We're also on Avo TV, or better yet, you can stream us live on YouTube. Hey, thanks for watching. I am Judith at TV. Bye for now.